Hello students, welcome to the video lecture on the research project. Before we begin and analyze, outline what is expected of you in this project, it's important to note that this project has been heavily adapted onto our move to distance learning. It's more appropriate now to think of this project less as a research project per se and more of a writing about research project. Right? I will have given you the sources. I will have given you a place for you to go and find those sources. What you need to do now is incorporate primary and secondary sources when writing about the film Children of Men. Real quickly, what do we mean by primary and secondary sources? Essentially, a primary source is the central source of a research paper or an essay, right? It's the text that you are using to analyze in your own sort of ideas and your own opinions. Secondary sources will be sources, essays, articles, and so forth, that were written and created to discuss your primary source. All right. Usually, secondary sources, most often, will be somebody writing about something else. So this project will ask you to balance primary and secondary sources in an analysis of Children of Men. Okay, so let's take a major look at what this assignment asks you to do. Breaking down the project, the writing about research project, you can see that you have three main sections. In each of these three sections, you have sort of a task that you need to do, a sort of central goal that you need to accomplish. The sections are the literature review, scene analysis, and defend your analysis. All right. Sections 1 and 2 are sort of completely separate. All right. Each of those have two different tasks that you need to do. And then in the third section, you will bring everything together to prove whether or not you believe the film is hopeful or dystopian. So let's take a look at the literature review. The literature review asks you to take two of the sources from the Children of Men reading material on Blackboard and write about two of those essays. All right, you will write about two of them. So if you go into our film March 23rd to April 18th folder, see this section here that says reading for the research projects. You click on that. That will give you two main things to look at. First of all, go ahead and ignore this for right now. And what we're talking about for the literature review is if you click on the research essays, it will pull you up 4 examples. Pick any 4 of these examples, any 2 of these examples from these 4. Select any 2 from here, and you will write about those in your literature review. All right. So the material for the literature review comes from this section. Pick any 2 of these articles. All right. You will have 1 paragraph for each of those. We'll talk a little bit about how to write those and give you some guidelines on how to write those in a moment. All right. But as of right now, you will write 1 paragraph for each of the materials that you read on Blackboard. So 1 paragraph for 2 of these. So you're going to read 2 of these. Give me 1 paragraph for each. The next section is the scene analysis. The scene analysis asks you to write about 2 scenes from the movie and use those scenes and explain how those scenes reflect a hopeful or dystopian message. Now I want you to be very, very specific. Right? You may write about 1 scene that you can find being discussed on the video lectures or PowerPoints or anything related to the class. So you may choose 1 scene that has been discussed by myself in a video or during a virtual class or written about on a PowerPoint. You can select 1 of those scenes. Then you yourself must find 1 other scene, okay, from the movie to analyze. So 1 scene that you can find written about or discussed on Blackboard, 1 scene that you have to find on your own. You may use YouTube or the internet as a great source to find scenes from Children of Men. Essentially, if you select Blackboard, if you select Google and just Google Children of Men important scenes, you'll be able to find basically all of the key scenes, all of the most important scenes on Children of Men. So in the second section, all right, you will not use anything from what you have read. All right, you will just find 2 scenes from the movie. You may choose one that was done in class. You may choose one that was done out of class and give me 1 paragraph on each scene. The last section, the Defend Your Analysis section, asks you to reflect on everything that you have written about and done in the previous first 2 sections and then pull it all together to answer the question, is this film hopeful or dystopian? All right, we have a whole nother video lecture on section 3, and so we will discuss this in greater depth in another video. Right, this section, like the others, will also be 500 words, right? At least 500 words. Right, so this is a breakdown of the assignment. Now let's go and return back to that thing I told you to ignore in the research folder. So again, if you go back to our folder on film, April 23rd, March 23rd to April 18th, click on the readings for the research project. All right, you see these 2 things. We've already discussed that the research essays are the essays from which you will choose 2 to write about. Right? Let's click the research template. Okay, open it up. Right? So this is a template for you to use to put your information and your writing into this structure. So I have given you a structure on how the paper should be organized. Okay? So you would put your name in here. You would change the date. All right? You would give it a title. You'd write the title in here. You'd write the title of essay 1 here. Then you would copy your paragraph about essay number 1. All right, your summary paragraph here, you would write it in. Write the title here. Write your summary of an essay paragraph, your other paragraph here. Go to your scene analysis. Copy and paste your 2 scenes that you're going to analyze here for the 2 paragraphs. And then write in or copy your a final defense of your analysis, whether or not the film is hopeful or dystopian. And then I've also given you the works cited. All right, you need to do 2 MLA works cited entries for the essays that you read from Blackboard. Right, I have given you Children of Men. Now note, when it says stuff like copy title of source 1 here, that means put the title of the essay that you're summarizing first there. One of the things you want to do is remove all of this boilerplate from your final essay. When it says copy and paste, copy title, paste your paragraphs here, it's saying put your information in here. Whether or not you're just going to sit down and write it or you're writing it in a separate document and moving it over, that doesn't matter. Right? You'll also be able to open this document in Google Docs. Right? So I've given you this to help you structure the assignment, and you are just putting in your writing into this template. Okay? Use this template. Do not deviate from it. I want you to have each of the 3 sections clearly delineated. I want you to put in the information in this order. All right? Okay, so let's take a moment, and then we'll look at and break down further some of the key parts of this assignment. So as mentioned, the central question that should guide your entire assignment is whether or not the film Children of Men presents a hopeful or dystopian vision of the world. This will be the question that you will write about in depth in the 3rd section of the assignment, right? But it's the central thing. It's what you are going to try and prove using secondary and primary sources when writing about Children of Men. As stated, your research project, if you remember, has 3 parts: literature review, scene analysis, and then your defense of your analysis. Everything will be graded via rubrics. So this is exactly like how we've been grading everything so far in the semester. Here's an example of what rubric grading does. Right, so let's look at the first section. All right. Ideally, you should be able to complete this section within the next 72 hours. All right. One of the ways that will really help you successfully complete this project is if you spread it out over the time allotted. All right. And try and do it in chunks. Try and do each section in 48 to 72-hour periods that will still give you enough time to read over and make sure your writing is clear and readable. So this is the section you should do first. Right? So 1, if you have not read either or any of the materials in the reading materials section on Blackboard, do that immediately. Read 2 of those essays. All right? Hopefully you should have read 1 already to do the work that was required to complete last week, including the reading quiz. So in a literature review, the goal is for you to learn how to evaluate and accurately summarize the main idea of the readings that you do for a research project. By accurately summarizing the main idea of the material that you read, you'll be able to demonstrate what you have learned from this research. As stated before, you will write about 2 of the sources on Blackboard, right? Any 2 of those sources. It can be the one you read from last week. In fact, I would probably advise you do that. All right. So you give me 1 source for each paragraph, 1 paragraph summary of each of the 2 materials that you have read. Now, let's just talk very briefly about what is required to write a proper summary paragraph. Think of this information here as a guideline and a checklist. If you can look at both of the paragraphs for part 1 and understand that you're doing both of these and doing all of this for both paragraphs, for each paragraph, you should feel pretty confident about how well you have done your summary. So think of these as like a guideline and a checklist. You want to make sure that each of your paragraphs in the literature review of the research project is achieving these key goals. First, make sure that you state the author, title, and topic of the articles that you have read. Remember, the topic does not equal the thesis statement. If you read the essay for last week by Whittingen, you will know that sound design is the topic of that article. The sound of the movie is the topic. It is not his main idea. So before you state what the main idea is, you have to say what the topic of the article is. Use the title of articles to really help you figure this out. That's where you'll really see someone introduce the topic. So after you've done the first bullet point, then you do need to state the thesis statement of the essay. All right? What is the main idea of the article that you read? What is the most important idea? Next step. Identify at least 1 important detail and explain how it supports the main idea. So if the main idea is the central goal of what you read, you then need to find 1 detail, 1 scene the person analyzes from the movie, one part where they break down what something is important and explain how that supports the main idea of the essay. As always, when writing summaries in your own words, avoid copying phrases and sentences from the article directly. You have to write this in your own language. And both of these paragraphs should be at least 5 sentences long. Quick note on summarizing language. What I'm asking you to do in part 1 of the research project is put the ideas of what you have read in your own words. In part 1, the literature review, all right, there should be no quotes. Everything has to be summarized or paraphrased in your own language. Part 1 of the research paper, I will repeat, should have no quote material. Nothing should be quoted. To help you do this, you may only use 2 words per sentence from the original source. Right? So for every sentence in part 1, you may only use 2 words from the original source in writing your summary. So if we look at the example provided, the words in red are the 2 words that student used in writing a summary sentence about Whittington's essay. But also note, if you look, the student provided a parenthetical citation after the end of every sentence that uses an idea from the author. You should have a parenthetical citation. Remember, citing and attributing the ideas of others refers to the ideas. The fact that you are putting this into your own words shows and demonstrates that you've understood the material, but it does not give you access to pass off these ideas as if they are your own. Therefore, every sentence that contains an idea in part one that you have taken from an essay should have the page number or the author's name, if it's an online only source, at the end of every sentence. Look at the example. The person gave the author's name and then gave the page number where this concept is first introduced. All right, you should do this, the parenthetical citation, every single time. Next section, section number 2, the scene analysis. This is the section of the paper where you will analyze 2 scenes from the film. Right? You should not have any quotes from any of your literature review in this section. I want you to analyze this section all on your own. You will give me 2 paragraphs, all right, where you analyze 2 scenes and explain how they reflect a dystopian or hopeful message. The goals of this section is to show to me that you have learned to critically examine the film, you have learned to introduce and describe evidence from the film, and that you can write and connect ideas back. This part of the paper should be very familiar to you because we have been doing this exact procedure on all the other papers we have written throughout the semester. With the poems of Gary Jackson and the plays of Zetta Elliott, you were asked to analyze 2 scenes in every paper, and you were going to do the exact same thing here. The exact same rules, the exact same requirements, everything is exactly the same. All right, you're going to introduce the scene, provide the details and describe the scene, and then explain how that scene relates back to a central idea of hopeful or dystopian message. This is no different from the evidence quotation sandwich style that has been told to you on every single paper that you have written so far in the semester. It's no different from Jackson's poems. It's no different from the way you wrote about Zetta Elliott's plays. Right? So we have 3 steps. Step 1, introduce the context of the scene. Where does the scene take place in the movie? Is it early in the film? Is it towards the middle? Who are the main characters? All right, what's Theo doing? Is Key with him? All right, what is happening? Are they being hunted by the Fishers? Right? You introduce the context of the scene, then you go and explain, that's step 1. Step 2, explain in a detailed description then what you are watching. You may quote dialogue, what a character says, but you may just be describing camera movement and sound and what you see on the screen. Right? Step 2 is exactly like you are quoting from the text, except for film, you will oftentimes have to describe it a bit more in detail in your own language. So after you introduce the scene, then describe the scene, the next step is explain to us how this scene represents a hopeful or dystopian message. Just like your previous use of quotes, step 3 in analyzing evidence is the most important step and should be the longest part of the paragraph. Simple thing to remember, when writing about a scene from a film, remember that just like Gary Jackson was the author of the poems, and the narrators of the poems, his characters, did the action, the same thing with the director and the camera and the sound, right? When you're talking about whether or not this scene has a hopeful or dystopian message, Corwan is the one who is creating or presenting the hopeful or dystopian message. The characters are the only ones doing the actions. So never write about how Theo has a hopeful message. Theo is a character in the film. Theo is used by Corwan to represent a hopeful message. That is a very essential distinction that you should keep in mind when analyzing the film. And finally, the last section is the defend your analysis section. This is just when you will bring everything together and you may use the material you read in the literature review, you may use your analysis of scenes to describe to me whether or not you believe the film has a hopeful or dystopian message. Right? In this section, you may use I, but this is the only section in which you are allowed to use I, the third section of the research project. Right? So here you reflect on everything that you have read and analyzed in the project, and then present to me whether or not you believe the film is hopeful or dystopian. We will have a whole other video lecture breaking down how to go about completing the successful third section of the research project. So, as I would said, please get started. The first task I would have you do is write the literature review. So if you have not read any of the materials or have read one of the materials, please start reading and finish up your reading and begin to write your literature review for the assignment. Best of luck and be safe.